People feel the reason for many of these failed enterprises because due process was not followed. Is that true?
All I can say is that I've had those comments myself. I wasn't part of that process, so I wouldn't be able to comment authoritatively, about the level of interference, interest, and involvement. But what I can say is that we now have, a set of, discos, gencos that are owned by certain groups of core investors. What is important now is to ensure that we assist them not to fail, because it's not like a company, a manufacturing company, that its failure has no, really, massive impact in terms of social services. If the gencos fail, if the discos fail, then Nigeria will be in trouble, because the critical infrastructure of power will just become, a huge problem. So I think that the power sector recovery plan, as derived by and as articulated by the World Bank, with active collaboration, from all the stakeholders, NERC, BPE, the Office of the Vice President, Ministry of Power, everybody's involved. I think that that power sector recovery plan gives us a decent roadmap out of this challenge that we have.
There have been persistent calls now to review the sale of NITEL to NATCOM.
We don't have any plan to review that for right now. I mean, we've been invited by the legislature several times to review that process. So the sale has been concluded. The core investor has been, the assets have been handed over to the core investor. Of course, we have the performance, agreement plan, that we've signed with the core investor. So if we see any significant breach of the performance agreement plan, then we can invoke, the clauses of that plan.
When you talk of performance agreement plan, the fact that many of these assets have failed to yield significant impact, isn't this a violation, a gross violation for that matter, of the performance agreement plan?
There are milestones, that are embedded in the performance agreement plan. Of course, the core investor initially had, issues around raising the necessary capital for the infrastructural development of the enterprise. But we are monitoring the plan very closely, and like I said, if we see any significant breach of the covenants of that plan, we will invoke the necessary action.
Now, many of these complaints is not based on the BP policy itself, but they are arguing that due process wasn't followed.
But as far as our processes are concerned, we've followed all the steps that are stipulated in privatizing those enterprises. For the transactions that I've inherited, clearly, the due process, principle is strictly observed, and up to the point of selecting the eventual preferred bidder.
Some are even saying that many of the sales was not open to open and competitive bidding.
NITEL was open to competitive bidding. It was open to competitive bidding, and the process for selecting, the preferred bidder or the core investor was also, clearly open.
Now, we have a very disturbing report now that in the last administration, that within 72 hours, a directive was given to the NCP to award the sale of the Abuja and Enugu discos to Interstate Electrics. Could you confirm this?
Well, Interstate Electrics is not an investor, to the best of my knowledge, in Abuja Disco. They are the core investor in Enugu Disco. But to the best of the records that I have available to me, I have not been able to see, such directive in writing. And of course, I wasn't part of that process. But what I have seen so far doesn't give any evidence to that directive. But around the the last power sector privatization exercise, you've had a lot of stories and comments, some of which really I am not in a position to verify, authenticate, or debunk, as it were.
Tell us, how do you come about the choice of an investor?
We identify an enterprise for sale, for privatization. We do a diagnostic review of the enterprise estate. We look at the best transaction structure for the particular enterprise, and then we go through the process of advertising for expressions of interest, and the advertisement is public. The national dailies. In some cases, we even do international publications. The official, tendering document of the federal government. We do all of that, all in the bid to reach, as wide, an audience of investors as possible. So the expressions of interest are submitted. We evaluate the expressions of interest on the technical, bids, and then we go on to the process of the request for proposals, and then we ask for the successful interests that have been expressed to then submit proposals for the transaction. The proposals are also evaluated on their technical competence and on their financial competence, and they are scored. They are, we have ratings to score all those proposals, and eventually the winning bids are taken to the council for privatization.
Now let's see, how transparent is the whole process of privatization now?
Well, so far from what I've seen and what I have insisted on, I can assure you that they are extremely, extremely transparent. We're strictly in compliance with the due process as far as the privatization.
It's been argued that many of these assets were given out at a giveaway price.
That's not correct. All of the...
You think the prices are competitive?
Because there's a valuation of the assets that are done independently before the reserve prices are set. So these are not prices that are set, at the whims of the Bureau of Public Enterprises or anyone in government. We engage independent valuers who will then do, a thorough, valuation of the assets before we set the bid price for those assets. And if any of the bids don't meet the bid price, we reject the bids.